Wow. And that is Don Oakley. Man, that guy has a calm, patient surrender to the way he listens and communicates. And I hadn't, I've heard a lot about Don and Patty from you and Colleen over the years, but it's it's really humbling and nurturing to have a conversation like that, because it makes you keep yourself in check. Obviously, some of the delay in the video, you got to really wait for your moments, and because that's this whole Zoom world we live in. But also just with the way he responds or the time he takes to calculate the response, it makes you be in that space. And I just, he's not big on stories. He doesn't go into the drama, which, come on, Don, I love the drama. Give me some drama. But, that being said, I appreciate the very, calculated measure. He does talk about his past and his journey.
I
and all
love the
that.
fact that he doesn't have the drama, because we can get drama from most anybody else, right? And I really appreciate
Yes.
that he still told his story. He still had his turning points, and he had his story of how he
Yeah.
got into it all. And I love too that he didn't come to it from a spiritual standpoint. He really was more of a engineering, scientific brain sort of thing. Didn't think he was a creative person, even though I can see, he now sees he lives a very creative life, but came to it more of a curiosity of existence. That's what I like, the distinction of
Yes.
curiosity of existence and the meaning of life. Like that was kind of in him early on. And I just love hearing the different ways people articulate these awakenings, these turning points.
Yes, and of course, like you said, I mean the drama that I'm joking about, of course, is that extra ego, that extra thing that we sometimes seem to need on our spiritual journey to give definition to ultimately something that you can't define, and that's kind of what we get into with him, is that space, that intelligence, and we're using these terms and that silence, and like he talks about it as more of a void that all things are created out of, that basically is a reflection for action, activity in this reality. But it's really enjoyable to sit down and have a calm, very just mellow, I don't know. It's hard to describe that experience with him, but it made me feel very welcomed, very appreciated, very heard, and
Present,
very
honey.
present. Yeah, yeah, it was all about presence. Absolutely. And I think what's interesting is the profundity of that presence. I think oftentimes when we have these interactions with people, you and I have conversations all the time, and sometimes you're really in that deep presence. But a lot of times there's this background chatter, right? There's this story, there's this calculation of, okay, well, if they say this, then I got to say this and this and this and this and this. And it's all, predetermined guidance in a lot of our interactions in life. And, I think what's so grounding about Don is it doesn't appear to be that much story, or there's not a whole lot of preconditioned chatter in his eyes. You don't see that. You see, now you're talking, so I'm listening. What you said, now I respond. And there's that very, I don't know, it's almost like this cave of energy exchange that's kind of happening. It's almost like there's a resonance happening, body to body, awareness to awareness, even through Zoom. That it's really hard to articulate. It's a very subtle energy of awareness that is really grounding. And man, I could have talked with him for 3 more hours easily.
I mean,
Very,
yeah. I mean, he's there. He's awake. He's present. And you get lost
yeah.
in it, like lost in a good way, lost in the presence, not in the mind, in the questions, but lost in the depth. And I love that your new word for our podcast is profundity. You've said it almost every episode, which I love.
Oh, beautiful. I didn't know I was saying that, so I'm not trying to, make a new tag or anything like that with the word, but it is just that again, I've joked about it, but this podcast, if it's just if it ultimately just becomes for me to have these conversations with, all these different people, and for us to, enjoy that experience of having these conversations, that's enough. And we talked towards the end of it, we got to that point of, a lot of times we set out in life, okay, I got to get a job. This job has to fulfill these things. And if I'm not getting those things fulfilled, I'm not, living life to my fullest. And, we talked about how when you set out to do something, the accomplishment of that gives us fulfillment. And that's not really, I would say, the most fulfilling way of living life, because you kind of get to the end of these processes and that emptiness fills you back up, and you're confused. Well, why don't I feel fulfilled? I feel empty. I don't feel purposeful. And I think it's because there's an expectation attached to that job or to that project. And he has very, I'm not even going to try to reiterate how he said it, because just the way he said it, and how he said it was as important as what he said. But just the idea of, that nudge through life, and we know that meditation kind of keeps you in that relationship. It's that practice that, like he said, makes you aware of the mind and how the mind works and how, kind of chaotic the mind is. Meditation shows you that. And when you're shown that, then you have the opportunity to walk in that mental chaos, that preconditioned mental chaos, or you can walk through that spirit, that nudge, that gravity, that life asks of you.
It's an important distinction. At least it's been important for me on my journey.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned briefly in talking to Don, it's like I am a manifester. I have, and everybody has a different definition for what that even means, but there's this, the ego within me has manifested a lot of great things, a couple of meditation centers and a lot of CDs and a lot of music and a lot of travel and all this stuff. But as you were talking about, it's like there was, it didn't fulfill completely. And it also caused more dissonance in my being to create those things, because it was hard. I mean, there was my first yoga studio. I was freaking exhausted and had to lay on the beach in San Diego after we closed down for like a year, because I was so exhausted. And, I thought it was a good reason. I wanted to open the House of Bliss, my first studio, and I wanted to help people. But the distinction is, now that I understand now, 30 years later, is I thought that the world needed saving. I thought that people needed help. And that's where it was coming from, instead of just a natural. There was a part of me that was natural, wanted to do it, but there was that little ego in there. So now I'm very clear in my being that the world doesn't need saving. I don't need to help anybody. I don't have anything to teach, but I am here to share. I'm here to just share what has worked for me. I'm here to just love on people that I love. And whoever decides to show up and would like to learn something or what I share, then I'm happy to do it. But that need, it is, and that's fulfilling, is it comes out of a fullness rather than an emptiness. And it's an important distinction. At least it has been for me on my journey, to have that distinction in there of, and it's a very subtle distinction. And some people don't want to know that distinction. Some people just think the world needs saving and people need help and they're going to help them. And that's cool. You go see how that works for you. You go see.
And that was what was so gentle about Don was, at the end of that conversation, there was a point where it's like, listen, all of these steps, all of these degrees of life are necessary. There's a person deciding to do it this way or that way in this time, in this moment, it's as important as doing it a completely different way next time. That was what was
Yeah,
so
so
gentle
true.
and nurturing about it was that it, it's very easy. And like he said, again, there's a lot of things like talking about the spiritual journey feeling selfish, for instance, because it requires you retreating into yourself and going into a meditation or a yoga or some kind of a silent retreat of some sort to ask these deep, profound questions. That, from a societal view, seems selfish when really, like he said, was the end of that self-reflection is almost certainly going to bring you to a more connected uh, state of being with your neighbor, and you're going to come to realize how like your neighbor you are, and you are your neighbor as you become less and less identified with these other things. And it's good to feel that from him, because and like Erin and I, that was a conversation her and I or she and I really kind of resonated on, was the calamity of all that, and am I doing this right? And you build this whole mental construct of how to live through life, when really there's a lot of times where life, or that intelligence that Don spoke about in life, is saying, no, retreat, go be in a process of self-discovery for now. And we fight that. And we don't do that because society says not to do that. And, and then you realize that, a year later, I should have been doing that this whole time. And now guilt. And now, it's all these different areas for the ego to keep you in a stranglehold, and, ultimately surrendering to that nudge, that spiritual space. People call it God. I mean, people call that space God. Just don't put an identity to God then. It can be in that ethereal void, that space where intelligence allows creation to happen versus forcing creation to happen. And I mean, I know I'm just running in circles because there's so many elements to that I know hit me in ways that I'm going to have to process afterwards. But it's really, it's he's such a reflection of a point to attain to, a point to a self-awareness and a presence to point to as a hierarchy of to achieve, but with the gentleness of, don't be hard on yourself if you're not at that, in that degree of presence yet. You're in the degree of presence you need to be in this moment, and that's good. He in that degree of presence in this moment, and that's good. It's all good. The point is to keep asking those questions, keep having that curiosity, keep growing towards that self-reflection. And that is felt in that conversation. And I really, really enjoyed that and feel content from that.
That's beautiful. Your questions were awesome.
They weren't my questions. That's the funny thing, is eventually when he started to talk about that space, that all this, that muse that he talked about, that space, it's all the questions are being drawn out from that presence.
That's nice.
And that's, I love the way he talked about that, because I resonate with that very much so. Because even as a producer, engineer, all these identities, these hats, as a drummer, musician, for a really long time, I also felt like I wasn't creative because I wasn't as creative as the people that I saw work more creative. And once I surrender to that consciousness and that awareness that's behind my eyes, it's creating in its own unique kind of way. And then what comes out of that is, for instance, the studio. This thing is weird. It's unique. It's very different, and it all came manifest from, okay, time to build, go build. And yeah, of course there was design creativity and this and that, but it really all kind of unfolded from that state of being that he's talking about. And at the end of it, it's like, oh, I created something. No, something was created through my experience of building. And same thing with the questions. It's those questions are being drawn out from a well of consciousness, from my perspective, from my experience, but they're not my questions. And it's it's something that it's weird because the ego wants to be like, oh, well, thank you very much. I tend to ask some very, very, very profound, there you go, questions. And I'm very awake. And you should know that when I ask a question, man, it's going to be, that's the ego. The ego wants to have that experience. And then the humbleness also wants to be like, no, it wasn't me at all. It was consciousness interacting with itself. This whole drama that I have both experiences. It's like, yeah, I asked fucking questions, but it's only because I have a shit ton of curiosity and a lot of things to ask. But it's funny how we have that duality and that ego. It's like, that's what's so fun about this experience of this podcast is getting to have that unique experience. That's a degree of consciousness to interact with. And it's a playground and having that fun. And Tom, last week was a different, conversation. And then Eddie before that was a different one. And I agree with what you said towards the end of the podcast, or maybe it was after the podcast, but you said this podcast is designed in nature to talk with a whole variety of different people, and each person has their own thing to add to it. And that's what's fun about it. And the value is innate in the differences of the people's perspective of that. And it's beautiful. And it's, we had Eddie, her experience was a very much of the same curiosity. It was very, I think I said, it was very innocent and curious. And that's how she unfolded in her life. And then, Tom had a much different way of how he got into his thing. And Werner had a whole different way of getting into his thing. And Roger also, he called himself the spiritual cowboy, at one point. And it's all these, experiences. Oh, and then Aaron and I, that was like my camaraderie. Cause it's like, we're in this same, no offense, younger, generation of spiritual seekers, but we're all asking questions that are designed by consciousness to open us up to new experiences and surrender to the divine intelligence that is, nudging us through this.
Well, that's one of the ways that I know Werner describes experience as human beings. It's like we're all different facets. There's the diamond, and you can even look at the diamond what comes from, the rock on top. So there's a big rock with a diamond in it. And as we chip away, it's like our personality and our personas, I like the way Don put that, is all like the rock on top, but we're all, the essence of all of us is all the diamond inside. And then as we chip away, we're all these different myriads of experiences coming through, but the essence of us is all the same. And that's even, it's like, yeah, on this earthly age, this time-space continuum that we're having this experience. And yes, I have more years on the planet, and Don has a few more years than I do, and you have a few more years than Aaron does. But the essence of us, the awareness is the same. It's the same diamond, and it is timeless and ageless and unborn and never dies. But we get so, the conditioning starts when we're born. It's that you're this clean slate, and all of a sudden it's like the first thing you teach is mine, your name. This is yours. This is mine. Give me that. This is mine, and that distinguish it between yourself and somebody else. You get that programming pretty quickly, and then it gets really sticky. And people want to hold on to their personalities and their, not their personalities, they want to hold on to the identification with their thinking and the constructs. And that's why this is not necessarily for everybody, the self-inquiry journey. It's for a conversation for seekers. And some people, like Don's talking about, have that. I like how he described that mechanism is one of discontent. And I remember Deepak Chopra said that too. One of my first seminars with him, he's like, you're all seekers. We're all seekers that have shown up here. You wouldn't have shown up here if everything was fine and there was no questions. You showed up here at this retreat, at this seminar, because you have questions. There's some discontent in there. There's some inquiry in there.
Absolutely, man. And I think the jury's still out on whether or not, even when we're born, there's a clean
Totally,
slate. I
right?
mean, there's programming. I mean, and not that I disagree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is, I think that's the notion is, okay, you're born, clean slate, and then programming happens. But I mean, as we're finding more, I don't know about evidence. It's hard to say scientific evidence, but it seems like there's there's programming within our human nature, in our DNA. There's seems to be programming happening even before we're born,
Generational.
and generational,
Mm-hmm.
hereditary programming, and and then life starts compounding more programming on top of that. And I think what I feel really thankful for right now is a sense of gentleness and forgiveness about my past selves and my past experiences, and being much more forgiving and gentle with my own journey. And that's something that I think Don kind of resonates outward, is this gentleness. Because and I've had a lot of conversations with certain people in my life that have had addiction, trauma, and there's a lot of guilt once somebody starts to spend enough time out of substance abuse. There's this guilt for having lived in that substance abuse, and a lot of times it's the substance abuse comes from a trauma or multiple traumas or compounding trauma, or there's this, like you said, the stickiness of programming maintains this very negative experience for your life, and people get stuck in that, and then they come out of that, and then they look back on just the chaos was that was born from that very negative pattern. And there's a lot of guilt attached, and a lot of times it seems like that guilt draws you back into that substance abuse. And I don't have substance abuse, but I do have certain addictions. I have addiction towards food. I could eat food like crazy. I look at a loaf of bread and I practically gain 5 pounds. Food is a compulsory addiction for me. I just, they make cookies, I eat cookies. And that's terribly unhealthy for me. And the way out of that is awareness, and be like, all right, dude, 12 cookies one day, not a good pattern, man. So, and that's a soft approach to addiction. And there's some people that have a lot of deep rooted traumas that are compounded by addiction, and then it's perpetuated by this guilt that I think people have. But when you really take the big picture, and it's like, if you get to 20 years old and you got hereditary pattern or programming, you got generational programming, and then you have programming from day 1 to day, not day 20, because 20 years is not one day or 20 days, but to the day of 20 years, and then you start reflecting on your life, man, you have to go into that process with patience,
Compassion,
perseverance,
forgiveness,
passion, and absolutely with
yes,
yourself. And I think that's there's a lot of religious organizations or spiritual books that talk about forgiveness of other people, but man, the forgiveness has to start within yourself too, because you are going to go through the minefield of your past experiences when you start to self-reflect, and it is a dark and windy road. And I think having people in life like Don, and I know there's a lot of other people. There's not a lot of other people like Don. There's very few people like Don, but their powerful gravity, kind of breathes patience and compassion and gentleness through that process. And I'm very thankful to have had this, communication with him, and then to reiterate, yes, keep down that spiritual reflection path, keep seeking, keep asking questions, keep being curious, but keep being very gentle with yourself and being very humble and thankful during that process. That's the way out, I think, of some of these mechanisms that want to keep a stranglehold on negativity. They'll teach you stuff. That negativity, that fear, that will teach you stuff, and it will point at things to look at and ask questions about. But man, love yourself and be gentle through that whole process, because
You can, yeah,
you're
yeah,
with
with
you.
you. Beautiful. Beautiful.
So,
Thanks, honey. Another good
yeah.
episode.
Absolutely. That was a great conversation. Thank you again for all your hard work in the background, setting all this stuff up and, coordinating it. I don't have the mind for it, so
No,
I'm
I
thankful
love it.
you
You know
do.
me. I know people. I love the connection. I love reaching out to old friends and finding people to interview. It's a lot of fun. So I'm a passion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All
Well,
right.
let's keep
Love
going,
ya.
man. I love it.
Bye.